Vanessa Crowell swung the crowbar on my front door like she was trying to kill it, and the sound that came back was not wood cracking. It was steel laughing at her. She hit it again, harder this time, while a local news camera rolled and half the neighborhood watched from the sidewalk with their phones raised. What she did not know was that the door she was attacking weighed 900 pounds, had a reinforced composite core, and had been designed by the one person in Mesa, Arizona, who understood exactly how to build something a bully could not break. My name is Gabriel Mercer. I was 46 years old when this happened, and before that morning I had spent most of my adult life avoiding unnecessary conflict. I worked as a structural safety engineer for federal facilities, which sounds dramatic until you realize most of the job involves spreadsheets, concrete samples, and telling government contractors that no, gravity has not changed since last Tuesday. I liked rules when they made sense. I liked systems that worked, and I believed most problems could be solved with a calm conversation in the right document. Then my father died, and a woman with a laminated HOA badge decided grief made me easy prey. My dad, Thomas Mercer, had lived in Juniper Ridge for nearly 28 years, in a low ranch house on a corner lot with 2 mesquite trees, a cracked bird bath, and a faded copper mailbox he had built himself from an old sheet of naval brass. He had served as an aircraft mechanic in the Navy, and that mailbox was his little monument to those years. Nothing flashy, just dark copper with a small white anchor painted on the side. Every morning, he would walk out in slippers, open it, complain about junk mail, then spend 20 minutes reading every grocery flyer like it contained classified intelligence. When his heart gave out at 71, I moved into the house to settle the estate. But the truth was, I was not ready to let the place go. The kitchen still smelled like his coffee. His reading glasses were still beside the recliner, and there was a dent in the garage wall from the time he tried to teach me how to reverse a trailer when I was 16. Grief does strange things to your sense of time. Some days I could work for 12 hours without feeling anything. Other days I would find one of his old screwdrivers and have to sit down because suddenly the room felt too quiet. That was when Vanessa started sending notices. Vanessa Crowell was 54. President of the Juniper Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years, and a real estate broker who wore cream-colored suits in 100-degree weather without ever appearing to sweat. She had the kind of smile people use when they want credit for being polite while saying something cruel. Her husband had left years earlier. Her daughter lived out of state, and from what the neighbors told me, the HOA had become the place where she stored all the control she could not exercise anywhere else. At first, the violations were almost funny. My trash bin was visible from the street for 43 minutes too long. A garden hose was not fully coiled. My pickup had a water spot on the driver's side door that supposedly reflected poorly on neighborhood standards. Each notice came with a $50 fine and 3 paragraphs of language that made it sound like I had endangered civilization. I paid the first 2 because I did not have the energy to fight. That was my mistake. People like Vanessa do not interpret patience as kindness. They interpret it as permission. 4 days before my father's funeral, I received a certified letter ordering me to remove or repaint his copper mailbox. According to Vanessa, the board had approved a new exterior color palette limited to sand, sage, and something called muted adobe. I called her office and told her the mailbox had been there since 1989. She said older installations were not automatically exempt. I explained that my father built it after returning from a Navy reunion, and that I was leaving in 2 days to bury him in Ohio. There was a pause. Not a sympathetic pause. More like she was deciding which knife to use. Then she said, "Everyone has personal circumstances, Mr. Mercer, but standards only work when they apply equally." I remember staring at the wall while she spoke, looking at a framed photograph of my father standing beside that mailbox in a ridiculous captain's hat. I asked for 30 days. She gave me 7. I hung up before I said something that would have made the conversation more memorable than it needed to be. The funeral was held under a gray sky outside Dayton, with 6 sailors carrying the casket and a bugler playing taps so cleanly it felt like the sound cut straight through my chest. At the end, an officer knelt in front of me and placed the folded flag in my hands. I had seen that ceremony before, but when it is your father's flag, the weight of it feels different. It feels heavier than cloth should feel. I took a lay flight back to Phoenix 2 nights later, landed during one of those rare desert storms that turns every street into black glass, and reached the house shortly after 3 in the morning. I was exhausted, soaked through, still wearing the dark suit from the service, and all I wanted was to sit in my father's chair until sunrise. My key would not turn. I tried again, then a third time, thinking maybe I was too tired to line it up correctly, but the lock was new, bright silver, cheap-looking, and completely unfamiliar. I stood there under the porch light, with the rain running off my sleeves, the folded flag tucked under my arm, listening to my own key scrape uselessly against someone else's hardware. There was no notice on the door, no emergency number, no explanation. I called the HOA line and got voicemail. I called Vanessa and got sent directly to voicemail after one ring. Finally, I walked 3 houses down and woke my neighbor, Caleb Ruiz, a retired firefighter who opened the door wearing gym shorts and holding a baseball bat. He took one look at me, lowered the bat, and said, "They actually did it." Caleb told me a locksmith had arrived that afternoon with paperwork signed by Vanessa, claiming the property had been abandoned and needed to be secured against unauthorized occupancy. My truck was in the driveway. My utilities were active. My name was on the deed, and she knew exactly where I was because I had told her I was burying my father. I slept on Caleb's couch that night. Though slept is a generous word. Mostly I lay there staring at the ceiling fan while anger settled into me. Not hot anger, not the kind that makes you punch a wall, but the quiet kind that organizes itself. By dawn, I had made 3 decisions. First, I was getting back into my house legally. Second, I was going to find out exactly how far Vanessa's authority really went. And third, she was never going to control my front door again. By 8 that morning, I had a locksmith open the house in the presence of a sheriff's deputy. And by 9, I was sitting at my father's kitchen table with a legal pad, a black coffee, and the kind of focus that usually showed up only when somebody had designed a roof badly enough to kill people. The deputy could not arrest anyone on the spot because the HOA had produced a work order claiming an emergency security concern, but he gave me an incident number and suggested I speak with an attorney. That work order became the first item in what I started calling the Crowbar file. The second was the locksmith invoice, $360 paid from HOA operating funds, authorized personally by Vanessa. The third was the certified letter about the mailbox. By lunchtime, I had more paper spread across the table than my father used during tax season. And somewhere between the deed and the community bylaws, I began to understand why Vanessa had chosen that moment to come after me. She did not think I would fight. She thought grief had made me soft, distracted, and easy to push out of the way. She had mistaken silence for surrender, which is a dangerous mistake to make with an engineer because we are usually quietest when we are measuring the load. I spent the afternoon at the county recorder's office pulling every document connected to Juniper Ridge, going all the way back to the original covenant filed in 1986. On page 19, buried beneath language about satellite dishes and recreational vehicles, I found the sentence that changed everything. Exterior fixtures installed before January 1, 1992. Were grandfathered and could not be forced into compliance with later aesthetic amendments unless they created a verified safety hazard. My father's mailbox had been installed in 1989, with the original permit still attached to the property file. Vanessa's entire case against it was worthless. Better than worthless, actually, because she had used an invalid violation as the excuse to interfere with my home. I copied the page, certified it, then drove straight to a real estate office. Crowell Premier Realty occupied a glass-fronted suite beside a day spa and a boutique that sold candles for prices usually associated with medical procedures. Vanessa sat behind a white desk, wearing a pale gray suit and reading glasses that she removed very slowly when I walked in. She gave me that practiced smile and said, "Mr. Mercer, I assume you are here to discuss your outstanding compliance matter." I placed the covenant, the permit, the locksmith bill, and the sheriff's incident report on her desk. "No," I said, "I am here to discuss yours." Her smile tightened. I explained the grandfather clause, then asked her to show me the board vote authorizing the lock change, the written emergency finding, and the legal basis for using association money to secure a home owned and occupied by a dues-paying resident. Vanessa leaned back and folded her hands. The board acted within its authority to protect community safety. What danger did my front door present while I was at my father's funeral? She looked at me for a long second, and I saw something move behind her eyes. Not guilt, not embarrassment, just calculation. There were concerns about unauthorized occupancy. From whom? We received information. From whom? That is confidential. I took out my phone, set it on the desk, and told her I was recording the conversation. She snapped that I did not have permission. I told her Arizona only required one-party consent, and since I was one of the parties, we were all set. That was the first time I watched Vanessa lose control of her face. It lasted less than a second, a little twitch near the mouth, but it was enough. 10 minutes later, she wrote me a reimbursement check for the locksmith fee and called it a goodwill adjustment. I called it Exhibit D. On the way out, I noticed 7 Juniper Ridge properties displayed in her office window. All corner lots, all listed below what similar homes were selling for. That detail sat in the back of my mind until the next morning, when Caleb knocked on my door with a woman named Eleanor Price. Eleanor was 76, recently widowed, and angry in the precise way only retired school librarians can be angry. She brought a folder thick enough to stop a small caliber bullet. Vanessa had cited her for faded curtains, an unapproved bird feeder, driveway discoloration, and a rose bush that supposedly obstructed community sightlines. After 11 months of fines and threats, Eleanor sold her house to an investment company connected to Crowbar Premier Realty for nearly 18% below market value. She was not the only one. Over the next 4 days, Caleb introduced me to 5 more families, and every story followed the same pattern: a death, a divorce, a medical crisis, a job loss, then a sudden storm of violations, legal threats, emergency inspections, and pressure to sell. Vanessa was not enforcing standards randomly. She was selecting people who were already exhausted, wearing them down, then buying their homes to shell companies. The HOA was not her kingdom. It was her acquisition department. Once I saw the pattern, I could not stop seeing it. Association records showed unexplained consulting payments to Crowbar Premier Realty. Maintenance expenses spiked around the same months targeted families sold. 3 homes Vanessa had acquired were being converted into short-term executive rentals. Even though Juniper Ridge's original covenant restricted rentals under 12 months, she was using rules to punish everyone else while quietly exempting herself. Eleanor became my unlikely field commander. She knew every resident, every property history, and every board member's favorite weakness. She also possessed the invisible superpower of older women carrying grocery bags. Nobody noticed them listening. Within a week, she had learned that the treasurer, Priya Nandori, had been denied access to complete bank records, and that another board member, Malcolm Reed, had never been notified about several so-called emergency votes. Vanessa had been making decisions alone, then writing minutes afterward to make them look official. The retaliation came quickly. A handwritten notice appeared taped to my door, accusing me of installing an unauthorized camera. It referred to the small doorbell camera I had added after the lock incident. I called the professional management company listed on the HOA website, and a confused compliance officer told me they had issued no such notice. Board presidents were not permitted to create individual violations, and official notices had to be mailed. I sent her a photograph of the document. Her voice changed immediately. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "this letterhead is ours, but this notice did not come through our system." I asked whether her company would cooperate with an audit. She said yes before I finished the sentence. That evening, I received an anonymous text that read, "Stop digging before you lose more than your mailbox." Eleanor looked at the screenshot, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Vanessa always puts 2 spaces after a period." She learned typing on a typewriter and never recovered. It was the first time I laughed since the funeral. The next morning, I installed 6 motion-activated security lights around the property, all city-compliant, carefully angled, measured, permitted, and positioned so they illuminated only my yard. I made sure the copper mailbox stood in the brightest pool of light. It looked almost ceremonial after sunset, that little white anchor glowing against the dark metal. I knew Vanessa would react, and she did not disappoint me. 2 days later, she arrived at 7 in the morning with her loyal vice president, Curtis Vale, a nervous man who sold insurance and apologized, with his eyes even while agreeing with her, along with the supposed lighting consultant and an elderly neighbor named Rosa Delgado. Vanessa announced that Rosa had filed a formal complaint because my floodlights were shining into her bedroom and keeping her grandson awake. Rosa lived 4 houses away around a curve, with 2 roofs and a mature Palo Verde tree between us. There was no physical line of sight. Still, she looked genuinely upset, so I asked her to walk me to her house and show me the glare. Vanessa stepped between us and said an inspection had already confirmed the violation. The consultant held up a light meter like he knew what it did. I asked for his certification. He said it was not required. I asked what company he worked for. He looked at Curtis. Curtis looked at Vanessa. Rosa looked at the ground. Then I asked Rosa who had helped write her complaint because it contained phrases like luminous spill coefficient and excessive vertical illuminance, language most people do not casually use over breakfast. Rosa hesitated, then admitted Vanessa had written it for her after showing her photographs of bright lights shining through a bedroom window. I turned on my lights and asked Rosa whether they matched the photographs. She stared at them, then shook her head. No, she said quietly. These are not the same. Vanessa's voice sharpened. Rosa, you are confused. Rosa pulled out her phone and showed me the pictures. They were real photographs of serious lighting violation, but they were not taken at my house. Eleanor, who had appeared at the edge of the sidewalk holding a travel mug and pretending not to be involved, stepped closer, studied the landscaping in the background, and said, "That is 614 Willow Bend. Vanessa bought that property last spring after she forced the Carsons out." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Vanessa had photographed illegal floodlights at one of her own rental houses and used the images to frame me. Then the so-called consultant backed away too quickly, bumped into his open equipment case, and spilled a stack of papers across my driveway. Property maps, purchase projections, names, addresses, timelines. I crouched and picked up the first page before Vanessa could reach it. Across the top in bold print, it read Juniper Ridge Strategic Acquisition Plan. My address was highlighted in red and labeled Priority Parcel 1. Rosa's home was listed beneath it as Phase 2 candidate. Eleanor's former house was marked completed. I looked up at Vanessa, and for the first time since this began, she had nothing to say. That was when the idea for the door came to me. Not as a piece of security, but as a test. I wanted to build something completely legal, completely untouchable, and irresistible to a woman who could not survive being told no. I called a specialty contractor named Owen Bishop, a former Army engineer who built secure entrances for banks, laboratories, and people who had made enemies with better resources than an HOA president. I told him I wanted a residential door that looked normal from the street but could survive fire, power tools, forced entry, and one furious real estate broker with terrible impulse control. He laughed for almost 10 seconds, then asked when we could start. Owen came to the house that afternoon carrying a tape measure, a tablet, and the relaxed expression of a man who had spent years around explosives and no longer found suburban drama especially threatening. He studied the entryway, tapped the framing, checked the slab, then looked at me and said, "You understand this is going to cost more than most people spend remodeling a kitchen?" I told him I did. He asked if I wanted the door to look intimidating. I said no. I wanted it to look ordinary until somebody tried to defeat it. That made him smile. 2 weeks later, after permits, structural calculations, fire review, and enough paperwork to make Vanessa choke on her own bylaws, Owen's crew arrived with a 900-pound composite steel door disguised behind a simple dark walnut finish. Inside it had a reinforced core, titanium anchors, electromagnetic deadbolts, battery backup, cellular alerts, and a biometric lock programmed only to my fingerprint. From the sidewalk, it looked tasteful. From 3 feet away, it was a bank vault wearing a cardigan. The installation happened on a Saturday morning, and by 8 o'clock, half the street had found an excuse to be outside. Eleanor brought coffee cake. Rosa arrived with her grandson and 2 folding chairs. Caleb leaned against his pickup, pretending he was there to supervise. Although he had already asked Owen 6 questions about the hinges, Priya and Malcolm came carrying boxes of financial records they had finally obtained from the management company. It almost felt festive, right up until Vanessa's white Mercedes turned the corner. She parked halfway into the crosswalk and stepped out wearing a red blazer, sunglasses, and the expression of someone arriving to stop a coup. Curtis climbed out behind her, carrying a folder, followed by 2 men I did not recognize, one holding a camera and the other gripping what appeared to be an official notice. Vanessa marched across the lawn without asking permission and announced that the installation had to stop immediately because the board had passed an emergency architectural restriction the night before. Malcolm laughed before I could answer. "I am on the board," he said. There was no meeting. Vanessa did not even look at him. Notice was distributed through authorized channels. Priya stepped forward. "I am the treasurer, and no emergency expenses were approved." "Which channels did you use?" "Telepathy." A few neighbors laughed. And that was when I saw the panic flash across Vanessa's face. She was used to people lowering their eyes when she spoke. Laughter was different. Laughter meant the room had stopped believing in her. She pointed to the man with the camera and said local media was documenting how one reckless homeowner was damaging property values with fortress construction. I recognized him after a moment. He was the same fake lighting consultant for my driveway, except now he wore a polo shirt with a press badge clipped upside down. I asked what station he worked for. He said Independent Community News. I pulled out my phone and called the real investigative desk at Channel 8, where I had already sent copies of the acquisition plan, the lock change invoice, and the fake violation notices. Reporter Dana Whitmore answered on speaker and told us her crew was 12 minutes away. Vanessa's confidence collapsed so fast it was almost visible. You cannot involve television in private association business, she snapped. I looked at the crowd, the fake cameraman, the forged emergency notice, and the 900-pound door being bolted into my father's house. I said, Vanessa, nothing about this has been private since you locked me out during a funeral. Then Owen cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted to hear about the break-in at his warehouse 3 nights earlier. Every face turned toward him. Someone had forced open a rear office window, searched project files, and copied the specifications for my door. The security cameras captured a woman in a hooded jacket, but the parking lot camera got a clear image of her vehicle, a white Mercedes with Vanessa's license plate. She said it could have been anyone driving her car. Owen nodded and replied, that is why the police checked traffic cameras between your house and my warehouse. The same vehicle was recorded at 3 intersections at 2:13 in the morning. Right on cue, a police cruiser rolled up behind the Channel 8 van. Detective Lena Park stepped out, walked straight toward Vanessa, and asked her to remain on the property while they discussed the burglary investigation. Vanessa glanced around as though searching for one last person who still believed she was in charge. Curtis stared at the pavement. The fake reporter slowly lowered his camera. The real camera crew began filming. Dana asked me to explain why I'd installed the door, so I told her everything. The mailbox, the funeral, the changed locks, the fabricated light complaint, the targeted widows, the below-market purchases, and the acquisition plan with my address highlighted in red. As I spoke, neighbors stepped forward one by one. Eleanor described being pressured after her husband died. Rosa admitted Vanessa had manipulated her into filing a false complaint. Priya held up financial statements showing tens of thousands of dollars transferred to Crowell-controlled companies. Malcolm produced board minutes for meetings that had never occurred. Vanessa listened until she could not stand it anymore. She lunged toward my front door and shouted that the installation violated community standards, then grabbed a crowbar from the back of Owen's work truck before anyone realized what she was doing. She swung once at the lock. The crowbar bounced back so hard it nearly left her hands. She swung again, screaming that I could not hide behind steel and permits forever. The door did not dent. It did not shake. It barely acknowledged her existence. Channel 8 captured the whole thing. Her red blazer twisted, her hair coming loose, the neighbors recording, the copper mailbox glowing in the morning sun behind her like my father had arranged the lighting himself. Detective Park stepped in, took the crowbar, and told Vanessa to place her hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut, and for the first time in 9 years, Juniper Ridge went completely quiet. Police found more files in her car, burner phones, lists of vulnerable homeowners, draft violation notices, property appraisals, and bank records linking HOA money to her real estate business. Curtis later turned over 6 years of emails because he was terrified she would blame everything on him. The criminal case took months, but the outcome was simple. Vanessa lost her broker's license, her company was dissolved, and she was sentenced for fraud, theft, burglary, and falsifying association records. Restitution returned money to 11 families, although no check could give them back the years they had spent feeling unsafe in their own homes. Eleanor became HOA president and made the first meeting last 22 minutes, which may have been her greatest achievement. The copper mailbox stayed exactly where my father put it. As for the vault door, it still opens with one fingerprint and closes with a soft mechanical click that reminds me of the night I stood outside holding his flag. Some people say spending that much money on a door was ridiculous. Maybe it was, but I was never really buying steel. I was buying back the feeling that my home belonged to me. So tell me honestly, was I right to fight her this way? Or should I have saved the money and moved on? And what would you do if an HOA locked you out of your own house while you were burying someone you loved? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. And share this with anyone who still thinks a board title makes a neighbor more powerful than the law.